Hello and welcome to another episode of Fantasy Fireside Chats. I'm your host, definitely not Christopher Russell, and today we're going to be looking at Divinity's Twilight Rebirth, a new fantasy epic that's coming to stores this September. The ebook releases on June 2nd, and you can get pre-ordered signed copies on ChristopherRussellAuthor.com. Now let me open to the prologue. Prologue, at the edge of reason. 697 years ago. The world burned. Streaks of orange and red crisscrossed the sky, put there by siege engines or battalions of elemental mages. When they struck true, flesh boiled, and horrendous cries rose along with embers and smoke. Even when they missed, the chaos of the battlefield only grew. Dry prairie grasses, waist-high in some places, went up like oil-drenched torches, casting forth tendrils of hungry fire that spread through the plain in a catastrophic chain reaction. From above, it probably looked quite pretty, like a quilt dappled with all the colors of the sun. Hopefully the divine veneer, content to watch mortals suffer from their heavenly halls, were enjoying the performance. For Darmatus Aurelian certainly wasn't. Gasping for air, he flipped back the slotted visor of his salle. He stabbed his lance into the dirt, yanked the thrice-cursed helmet from his head, and cast it toward enemy lines. Considering the way it was baking him alive, it belonged with them. Oppressive as the heat was, the caress of the ash-field breeze on Darmatus's stubble-lined cheeks felt wonderful. It might just be the best feeling in the world. A flake of soot dropped into his eye. He swore, blinking, and reached for the leather canteen on his belt. The liquid sloshed around inside. He dashed half onto his face and guzzled the rest. Grinning like a madman, he chucked the water skin in the same direction as the helmet. This battle would be decided in the next quarter hour. Either Darmatus would find a new, preferably full, flask at that point, or he and all the other leaders of the Alliance of Five would be dead. His brother, Raban, shaded his eyes, squinting into the swirling dust. "I think you hit someone." Though his tone was light, his gaze was dead. They'd suffered and lost much to reach this point, their own family most of all. A primal howl of fury confirmed his words. Whatever he'd struck clearly wasn't Terran like them, nor did it belong to a member of any of Lazaria's 6 other sentient races, some of whom stood with them on this field. That guttural growl of pure loathing belonged to something evil, something dark and ancient, monstrous and horrifying. Days before, that piercing, pained cry would have driven Darmatus to his knees. Now, well, it still made him shiver. He clutched one gauntlet with the other to stop his quiver, lest it spread. Gone were the days when he could simply be himself, even in the presence of those closest to him. He was a leader now. People looked to him for hope, courage, and strength, and he tried his best not to disappoint them. Creator knew what a difficult task that was. "They're ready, my lord." Unobtrusive as ever, his adjutant, Jarek Savain, materialized noiselessly at his side. Darmatus didn't react, though Raban jerked a little in surprise. He had long since stopped wondering how Jarek managed to do that. His stealth wasn't so much a skill as who he was. Everything about him, from his plain hair, to his impassive face, to his drab jerkin and breeches, was nondescript. Darmatus found it quite advantageous to have an aide who could come and go unseen. "I told you to call me Darmatus, same as before," he said for the 10th time? 11th? As if to spite him, Jarek bowed, placing a hand to his breast in deference. "That's not an option, my lord. Your station demands respect. What would your men say if they heard me refer to you so casually? More importantly, what would the other Alliance heads think? None of their servants would dare address them with such impertinence." Darmatus waved a mail fist dismissively. "I'm not them. I'm just a minor Terran lord, one who isn't even of noble blood. Given their hatred of our race, current crisis notwithstanding, I'm sure they'd rather spit in my face than look at me." The sounds of battle swelled and fell. Screams, clanging weapons, crackling flames, even the rumbling of the earth. As violent as the clashes were, they had much diminished from as little as an hour prior. Mere skirmishes compared to the bloodshed of the past 2 days. Enough had been shed to fill the gaping cracks in the ground, the caverns, ravines, and trenches dredged by opposing magical forces. Whatever the day's result, this region, once covered with bountiful farmland, would never be the same. Some of them say you should be our king, Raban said. Darmatus ignored him. Raban pressed on. Many of our soldiers agree. We've discussed this before, Raban. We're here to stop Sarkhan, not supplant him. Raban shrugged, but Jarek wouldn't let the matter rest. My lord, Raban is right. When we defeat your brother, if we defeat him, when we defeat your brother, if you don't take the crown, the other races will. That's enough. But, my lord, I said that's enough, Darmatus snapped. Seeing Jarek flinch, he softened. Please drop the issue, Jarek. You know why I can never be king, why I will never be king. That's precisely the reason you must, the diminutive advisor persisted. My lord, if you assume the throne, this becomes more than just a family squabble. It gives our cause legitimacy. Suddenly we aren't one member of a 5-lord, 4-race alliance, but a Terran nation-state, putting down a rebellion for the sake of the world, for all of Lazaria. No! Heart-pounding, blood-thumping, Darmatus had but a tenuous grip on his wrath. Something deep within his mind urged him to lash out and strike Jarek with the spiked fist of his gauntlet. Skin would rend, bone would break. The foot-deep ash on the ground would lap up the blood as he stood there smiling, triumphant, and Darmatus banished those depraved thoughts, shutting them behind the wall of virtue, justice, and compassion he'd cultivated all his life. But the more he fought, the more he used his magic, the more he called upon the Menair in his blood to control the arcane miracles bestowed upon mortals by their creator, the more those vile considerations corrupted him. Therefore, this would be his final battle, and he would not be king. He didn't trust himself to steer clear of the path trod by his elder brother, Sarkhan. As tears welled up in his brilliant blue eyes, Darmatus raised his gaze towards the copse of charred trees that perched like a hunched crone at the top of the only hill for leagues that had thus far avoided demolition. It was the smoke. It had to be the smoke. Why else would he cry, looking at the last bastion of their hated enemy, where Sarkhan, his beloved sibling, had chosen to make his final stand? Horns blared, one after another, their long, somber notes drifting to them from all around the hilltop. Jarek stiffened, glanced toward the small wood, then looked at Darmatus expectantly. It's time, my lord. That's the signal. We'll charge when I raise my lance. Sketching a curt bow, Jarek disappeared. Within minutes of his departure, the battalions of Darmatus's army were at attention, weapons clutched tightly in anxious hands. He began this campaign with nearly 20,000 soldiers. Less than half remained. They should have broken, cast their swords and bows to the dirt and gone home. But wounded, weary, and grim, they still stood on the plains of Harmuth because, for some reason Darmatus couldn't fathom, they adored him. Let's go, he said to Raban, who hefted his crossbow, knocked a single bolt, and followed him to the front of their army. Once there, Darmatus strolled down the row of men. He made idle chatter, asking about their wives, children, what they intended to do when they returned to their towns and villages. As they talked, he checked their spears and inspected their mail and plate, clapping them on the shoulder when he was through, regardless of how well maintained their equipment actually was. Darmatus treated every man who wore his livery, red and blue, like a sun, and they seemed to glow from the attention he lavished on them. Perhaps one day, he and his wife Ceres would have a son of their own as well. The horn sounded again. Darmatus found the center of the line, raised his lance, and then charged as he let it drop, roaring at the top of his lungs. Raban, his captains, and his entire army screamed a cry of victory and rushed up the embankment behind him. Thank you for joining us again this week for another episode of Fantasy Fireside Chats. Our focus was Divinity's Twilight Rebirth by Christopher Russell. There will be another reading segment next week, and please join us around the warm fire as we find out more about this fantastic fantasy universe. Thank you and have a great evening.